While not everything that happens in Pokémon was directly intended by the developers, there are some coincidences that are just as crazy and interesting as the actually intended stuff. So here are 25 crazy coincidences in Pokémon. So we all know about the iconic meeting between Ash and Ho-Oh during the very first episode of the anime, but what makes this encounter a little more wild is that Ho-Oh is based on a phoenix, who famously have the ability to be reborn from their own ashes. This one is definitely a coincidence since Ash is named Satoshi in Japan after Pokemon's creator Satoshi Tajiri, but it's still pretty wild. Another crazy coincidence involving Ash is that in the first Pokemon League that he participated in, he faced a character named Leon, which more specifically is the Japanese name of Richie's Pikachu, Sparky. This battle involved a Pikachu against a Charizard, and then, like 25 years later, Ash's last League match would also be against a character named Leon, and would also involve a battle with a Pikachu and a Charizard. In Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, one of the gym leaders that was introduced is a ghost-type user named Rhyme, who is themed around rapping. And also in these games, we were introduced to a ghost-type Pokemon in Skeledirge, who is themed around singing. But Rhyme never uses a Skeledirge in the games. I know gym leaders don't typically use starter Pokemon, but this definitely feels like a missed opportunity. Likewise, Rhyperior is a Pokemon who was introduced in Gen 4 and has some mining motifs, as it gains a safety vest and a hard hat upon evolution to go along with its iconic drill. Sinnoh also happens to have not one, but two mining-themed gym leaders in Byron and Rourke, but neither of them ever use Rhyperior at any point in time. I can give Byron a slight pass on this since Rhyperior isn't a steel type, but Rourke definitely could have used it on his rematch team or at the Pokemon World Tournament at the very least. You may have heard this one before, but one of the craziest coincidences in Pokemon is that Larvesta, in its shiny form, looks practically identical to Arceus, which is pretty wild. And what's also pretty wild is the fact that Narwade now exists in plush form and TCG form. One of my fan-favorite Fakemon from my Pokemon Cardinal series is now available as a super adorable and squishy plush, and also a TCG card. You can pre-order a plush right now with the link in the description, and when you do, you also get an early preview booster pack of my upcoming TCG as a special bonus that's going to feature a bunch of my Fakemon, including Narwade, and the Narwade card even comes as a special holographic alt art promo card, alongside the other Cardinal starters, Shrubberus and Embit, and these special promo cards won't be made available anywhere else. You'll find one of these special cards in each pack along with multiple others from the upcoming TCG, and honestly, support on stuff like this is what allows me to make the content that I do in the first place and to be able to do cool stuff like this. So if you would like to support the channel and get an amazing high quality plush and some awesome cards at the same time, you can use the link in the description to pre-order one today, and that would genuinely be super appreciated. And with that in mind, let's get back to the coincidences. There are also connections in Pokemon that are apparently just coincidences based on what we know about them, but could potentially have further connections behind the scenes that we don't know about just because the connections are so significant. For example, the two DLC areas in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, Kitakami and Blueberry Academy, line up perfectly with the Paradox Legendary Beasts and Swords of Justice. Kitakami is a Japanese-based area, just like Johto, where the Legendary Beasts come from, that is rooted in its past, like the past-themed Legendary Beasts. And Blueberry Academy is located in Unova, where the Swords of Justice come from, and is also very futuristic, just like the Paradox Swords of Justice. Again, this has no meaning or connections in the games themselves and amounts to absolutely nothing, but it also feels like maybe there could be a connection here behind the scenes. Something similar to this is that in Legends Arceus, the secondary types of the Hisuian starter Pokemon are the exact same as the secondary types of the Paldea starters, being Fighting, Ghost, and Dark. Some might consider this a tease to Gen 9, but we technically can't say for sure one way or the other. This next one, we're gonna have to wait and see what happens and if it actually amounts to anything more or not, but as of right now, a pretty big coincidence is that the initials of Area Zero from Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are AZ, just like the name of AZ from Pokemon X and Y. And it just so happens that his Eternal Flower Floette seems like it lines up pretty well design-wise with the Paradox Pokemon. With Pokemon Legends ZA also coming out next year as well, and definitely featuring both of these characters, that is either going to make this even more of a crazy coincidence, or it will actually go ahead and explain all of these similarities and why they exist in the first place. If I had to personally guess, however, I feel like it won't really be explored at all and is just gonna go left unsaid. But we are just gonna have to wait and see to know for sure. Another thing along these lines that feels like it became nothing more than just a big old coincidence are all of the Unova connections in Scarlet and Violet. Now, granted, we did end up getting an actual Unova connection in these games with the Indigo Disc DLC, but there were so many Unova references, connections, and homages in Scarlet and Violet that it was just far too much to simply just be alluding to a DLC expansion, and only half of one at that. There's even stuff from the original Gen 5 games that retroactively connects to Scarlet and Violet because of all the connections that were made. So either the people responsible for putting teases into the games went way overboard on this one, or it's just one big coincidence. Personally though, I feel like this situation could be one of those things that has more going on behind the scenes that we don't know about, because it definitely feels like we got the short end of the stick here. Now we're going to look at some crazy coincidences between various Pokemon, starting with the Togepi line and the Eon duo of Latios and Latias. These two groups of Pokemon have some very suspicious similarities in their designs, like the red and blue triangles that are basically Latios and Latias' trademarks, but obviously also appear on the Togepi line. Additionally, upon evolving into Togekiss, this Pokemon starts to morph into somewhat of an aircraft-like body style that is reminiscent of the Eon duo, which seems like it was even more pronounced in Togekiss's beta design as well, which was unearthed a few years ago. However, at the end of the day, these Pokemon don't have any actual connections to each other whatsoever, and don't even share any of the same typings. So, to our knowledge, all of these connections are apparently just coincidental. Speaking of stuff from Beta Diamond and Pearl though, Arceus' beta form strangely looks a lot like Marshadow. These Pokemon have no connection whatsoever, and there's no reason to suggest why they, of all Pokemon, would look similar at all, but there is definitely a resemblance here. The same can also be said for Venonat and Butterfree as well. These two have long been at the center of a theory, due to their similarities, that says that Venonat was once going to evolve into Butterfree instead. However, despite all that we've learned about the beta development days of Pokemon Red and Blue in recent years, there has been nothing to suggest that this is any more than just a simple coincidence. The same thing also happens with Cloyster and Ghastly too, as these Pokemon look essentially identical with the exception of Cloyster's shell, and they even sit right next to each other in the Pokédex. However, there is nothing whatsoever to this point that actually suggests that this similarity truly means anything at all. One connection between Pokemon that feels like maybe it could mean a little more though, has to do with Magearna and the Island Guardians of Alola. These Pokemon have no relation whatsoever outside of being from the same generation, but they have a ton of similarities. They're all part fairy type, they all have the same general body style, and they all have a connection in their designs to a certain animal. And they can each be tied to one of the islands of Alola, with Magearna being a perfect fit for the artificial Ether Paradise, which we actually see it tied to in the anime. To me, this feels like there could definitely be something more going on here, but for now, as far as we're concerned, it's just a crazy coincidence. There are also some connections that have often been discussed between Zygarde and Guzzlord as well. For example, the cave that Guzzlord resides in Alola and the cave that Zygarde resides in Kalos have the exact same layout, and their designs even have some similarities as well, which Guzzlord's designer, James Turner, once hinted could mean something more. But all of this at the end of the day eventually amounted to nothing, and we never ended up finding out what James truly meant by his cryptic hint. So while there could actually be something more to the relationship between these two Pokemon, all of the connections right now that we know of as far as we're concerned are just superficial. A more unique connection to a Pokemon has to do with Audino, and its connection to the Heal Ball. Design-wise, the Heal Ball and Audino are essentially identical, and the Heal Ball even falls in line with Audino's theme of healing, which it displays prominently in the anime as an assistant to Nurse Joy. However, the Heal Ball was introduced in Generation 4, while Audino was introduced in Generation 5, and we also know, thanks to interviews, that Audino was designed specifically for the anime of Pokemon Black and White so that Nurse Joy would have a Pokemon to accompany her, since all of the old Pokemon weren't going to be used in the Unova games and subsequently the anime. So unless they decided to base Audino on the Heal Ball for some reason, these two don't actually have any concrete connections to one another. Now we're going to look at some crazy character connections, and to start, I have got a couple that have to do with Erica. For example, Erica actually has a ton of similarities to the Kimono Girls. First, there's the fact that she literally wears a kimono. Second, Celadon City, where she resides, is where you obtain Eevee in the Kanto games, and all of the Kimono Girls are obviously famously known for using different evolutions. Erica also gives out the Rainbow Badge, and Celadon is known as the Rainbow City, which calls to mind Ho-Oh, who the Kimono Girls have a close association with. Despite this, however, Erica has never been mentioned to have a connection to the Kimono Girls of any kind. In the original games, Erica also has a lot of strange connections to the Ghost type, even though she's a Grass type gym leader. In the original Red and Blue, her kimono is folded right over left, which is a style that is usually reserved for the deceased at funerals. Being in Celadon City, she's also right next door to Lavender Town, the ghost-type hub of Kanto, and to complement all of this, she is also seen levitating a Pokeball in her original sprites, which is a very ghostly kind of power. So it kind of seems like maybe Erica was originally going to be a ghost-type gym leader instead, but despite all we know about Red and Blue's beta, as I mentioned before, with the help of all of the leaks and everything else that have happened in recent years, there has never been anything to suggest that this was actually going to be the case, and therefore that this is anything more than just a crazy coincidence. Despite having no connection or association to each other whatsoever, Barry and Bianca have some extreme similarities with one another. They both have blonde hair, they have similar hairstyles, and their outfits even use the exact same color scheme of orange, green, and white. And they're also both rival characters. These two look so similar in fact that it almost seems like they were designed as male and female versions of each other, but like I said, they don't have any actual connection whatsoever. During the early days of Pokemon, you might remember a couple of games popping up called Pokemon Diamond and Jade. These games were actually bootlegs that weren't Pokemon games at all, but instead were fan translations of the Japanese exclusive Ketai Denju Telefang, which is a Pokemon-like monster tamer. Obviously, the coincidence here comes in the form of Pokemon Diamond eventually becoming the name of an actual Pokemon game in Generation 4. But what's even crazier about this is that one of the eventual revisits of Pokemon Diamond, Pokemon Legends Arceus, takes place in the Hisui region, with Hisui meaning Jade in Japanese, just like the bootlegged Pokemon Jade. And speaking of Pokemon's early days, there is a well-known quote from the original Red and Blue where an NPC says that she wishes there was a pink Pokemon with a floral pattern, and in Gen 5, lo and behold, we got Munna, a pink Pokemon with a floral pattern. Many have taken this to mean that Munna was originally going to be a Gen 1 Pokemon at one point, but it seems to be the case that this is actually all just a crazy coincidence. For one, despite all of the beta leaks and all of the other Gen 1 beta stuff that I have referred to throughout this video, there has been no evidence of a Pokemon resembling Munna being present or intended for Generation 1 in any way. Additionally, in an interview with Ken Sugimori discussing the origins of various Gen 5 Pokemon, he discusses Munna and Musharna, and doesn't mention anything regarding this quote or Generation 1, and implies that these Pokemon were specifically designed for Generation 5 instead, which does make this all the crazier of a coincidence, but just a coincidence at the same time. Speaking of Gen 1, another apparent coincidence with this generation involves the legendary birds. It's long been a significant tidbit that these Pokemon use the Spanish words for 1, 2, and 3 in their names. On that note, we obviously just got a region based on Spain in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and that is where things start to get interesting here. In Generation 8, we obviously got the Galarian legendary birds as well, who are actually implied to be the original versions of these Pokemon, and are where these Pokemon got their names. With that in mind, it's even more interesting that these Pokemon are also well known to be migratory, and it even says in one of Moltres' Dex entries that it will migrate from the south. Well, with Generation 8's Galar region being based on the UK, south of that just so happens to be where Spain, aka Paldea, is located. Finally, after all of these years explaining why these Pokemon have Spanish in their names. That is obviously just an unconfirmed theory, but it does all line up and come together pretty well. One of my favorite out-of-nowhere coincidences in Pokemon has to do with the Steel-type Pokemon Cufant, and how its Dex number of 878 just so happens to be the area code for Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is famously known as the Steel City. On the subject of crazy coincidences that were maybe actually something at one point, we have the Ultra Beasts, and how a few of them directly resemble some of the human characters of Pokemon Sun and Moon. I have discussed this before, so I'll be brief, but Lily, Lusamine, and Guzma pretty much identically resemble Nihilego, Pheromosa, and Xurkitree, respectively. And while Lily's resemblance to Nihilego is explained in the game, the other two are not, despite there being a clear connection. Many have wondered whether this was planned to be something more at one point, but as of right now, it has ended up being nothing more than just a coincidence. And what is probably one of the craziest connections of this entire video happened all the way back in Generation 2. During the beta days of Gold and Silver, the starting town that would eventually come to be known as New Bark Town was known as Silent Hill instead. This was actually before the Silent Hill horror franchise was even released, so it didn't have the scary connotations that it does today. But then, shortly before Gold and Silver were released, the first Silent Hill game actually came out, which is likely what prompted Game Freak to change the name of their new starting town from Silent Hill to New Barktown. And those were some crazy coincidences in Pokémon. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like, and if you have any coincidences of your own to share, leave them in the comments below. As always, thanks so much for watching, and until the next one, as always, I will smell you guys later.